Welcome to Audit the Audit, where we sort out the who and what and the right and wrong of police interactions. This episode covers trespassing, officer conduct, and obstruction of justice, and is brought to us by OKC Vet HPA's channel. Be sure to check out the description below and give them the credit that they deserve. On March 22nd, 2019, Oklahoma City-based insurance adjuster Kenneth Grantz was parked outside of a home on Summer Valley Road in Blanchard, Oklahoma, awaiting assistance to conduct an inspection of the home's roof. Upon arrival, Mr. Grantz contacted a neighbor who had been instructed by the homeowner to allow Mr. Grantz to enter the property. Mr. Grantz had been parked for approximately 15 minutes when he was contacted by Officer Haynes of the Blanchard Police Department.
How's it going, man? You live over here, or what's we doing over here? I've had a couple people call in on you.
Okay. Am I doing something illegal?
Well, no, they're just calling on you saying that they don't recognize a truck in the area. So, my duty to check and see if you live over here or what's going on.
I live over here. I'm here for a purpose.
Okay.
That's it.
All right. You working? You see you got a ladder in the back. You working somewhere?
Yes, sir.
You got a driver's license on you just so I can identify you?
Have I done something illegal?
Well, I like to identify you, just know who I'm dealing with. Make sure.
Fourth Amendment right not to show that to you.
Well, if I'm making contact with you for a reasonable suspicion call like I am right now.
Being suspicious is a misdemeanor or felony.
Like many states, Oklahoma has no laws which require a citizen to produce identification in the absence of reasonable suspicion. I have discussed the topic of reasonable suspicion in many of my other videos, and I will link one of them in the info card above if you are interested in learning more about that subject. One important aspect of reasonable suspicion is that it requires a substantive standard of facts that compound upon one another to form a reasonable degree of suspicion. Simply witnessing something that may appear out of the ordinary is not enough to meet the level of suspicion required to detain and identify a citizen. It is also important to note that no 911 call was made to the Blanchard PD. Officer Haynes was flagged down by a passing motorist who drew his attention to Mr. Grantz. Although it is impossible to know what exactly the motorist told Officer Haynes, it is clear that his only motivation for contacting Mr. Grantz is that he was not from the area.
Okay. Well, sir, here's the deal. I was called on you, okay? For a suspicious vehicle, you said yourself you don't live over here, you have a purpose. What's your purpose? Is the purpose legal or illegal?
That's for you to determine.
Okay. So for me to determine that, I need to see your ID.
How is my ID going to determine whether I'm
Well, it helps let
legally
me know who
or
I'm dealing
illegally?
with. Let me know who I'm dealing with.
But my name doesn't tell you whether I'm.
Yeah, it would tell me, like, if I don't know if you belong over here. You said you don't, so I don't know if someone over here's got a VPO or something against you, and if you got your ID
Did
or
I say
something.
I didn't belong over here?
You said you had a purpose.
I don't live over here.
Okay.
Okay. I do belong
Okay.
here.
All right.
So that's as far as I'm willing to take it.
Do you have a date of birth then? Because I have to run it with a name and date of birth.
I'm not going to answer that question.
So you're telling me how I should do my job, yet you're not allowing me to do my job.
I'm standing up for my rights.
And I understand that, like I
Okay,
said.
I haven't done
but
anything wrong.
I'm doing my job,
Okay,
conducting an investigation.
I haven't committed a crime. I'm sitting here in front of a house, which is perfectly legal.
Well, you're not completely on the roadway there, sir.
You understand that by not identifying yourself appropriately as requested by the officer is illegal.
It's
Okay.
obstruction.
That's a secondary charge. Okay, I have to be, for you to ID me in the state of Oklahoma. Okay, I have to be suspected of committing a crime, about to commit a crime.
Well, you are committing a crime. You're trespassing.
The conditions of trespassing laws vary from state to state, but the general principles are relatively similar. Subsection A of Oklahoma Statute 21-1835 states that whoever shall willfully or maliciously enter the garden, yard, pasture, or field of another after being expressly forbidden to do so, or without permission by the owner or lawful occupant thereof when such property is posted, shall be deemed guilty of trespass. The code goes on to state that the word posted refers to signage clearly stating that trespassing is forbidden on the property, and that the signs must be placed conspicuously and at all places where entry to the property is normally expected, whether or not the property is fenced. There were no signs present at the home Mr. Grantz was parked outside of, and he did have the permission of the owner to enter the property. Officer Haynes' assertion that Mr. Grantz was trespassing by parking his vehicle on the outskirts of the property simply does not correlate with the language of Statute 21-1835. As Officer Haynes continues to accuse Mr. Grantz of trespassing, Captain Buloni makes a few questionable remarks.
That's your suspicion. Shut up. Somebody has
First
called
off,
in.
You don't tell me to shut
I'll
up.
tell you what I want to tell you.
Well,
And you are also required by
I'm
law,
not required by
upon
law.
request
If I
from
show
law
you- if I show
enforcement,
the state
to
statute
ID yourself.
that you're-
As Captain Buloni continues to question Mr. Grantz, Officer Haynes returns to his patrol vehicle and calls Assistant District Attorney Travis White.
Hey, Travis.
Hey, what's up, man?
Nothing. Sorry to bother you. I got a random question for you, though.
Well,
But-
technically, there's no obligation for him to identify himself. I mean, unless you've got reasonable suspicion that he's committing a crime.
Well, the thing is I have no reasonable suspicion to believe that he's not committing crime because he has a ladder in the back of the truck and he's in front of houses that aren't occupied right now.
Yeah, there's no compelled ID statute in Oklahoma. I have to think about. I mean, do you have anything else to suggest that he might be involved in something illicit?
Well, I'm curious why a man from Oklahoma City is parked on a dead-end road in Blanchard, and he has no. I ask him if he lives here, and he says I don't answer questions.
Yeah, man, I don't think you got enough to compel him to give you his identification.
Okay.
I mean, I know that's not what you want to hear.
No, that's why I called you instead of just ripping him out of his truck. He asked if he was free to leave, and I said not at this time. I have my emergency equipment activated, and I'm trying to investigate.
Well, I'll tell you what. If you're going to drive away, absolutely you can take him up because you can. He's driving he's operating a motor vehicle, but you don't have a traffic violation at that point.
Well, I follow him out of town until I get one.
This statement highlights Officer Haynes' willingness to violate Mr. Grant's civil liberties in an effort to force Mr. Grantz to reveal his identity. Officer Haynes is essentially admitting to planning to execute a pretextual stop. But what is more troubling is that it would be completely legal for Officer Haynes to do so. In the 1996 Supreme Court case of Wren versus United States, the court held that so long as an actual traffic violation occurred, an officer's pretextual intentions bared no relevance to the legality of the stop by stating, quote, "The temporary detention of a motorist upon probable cause to believe that he has violated the traffic laws does not violate the Fourth Amendment's prohibition against unreasonable seizures, even if a reasonable officer would not have stopped the motorist absent some additional law enforcement objective." The Wren ruling is highly controversial, and critics of the ruling argue that it incentivizes officers to conduct cursory traffic stops in hopes that the stop will produce evidence of more serious crimes, as well as paving the way for discriminatory enforcement of petty traffic infractions. Nonetheless, the high courts have yet to offer a solution for the potential problems created by the Wren ruling, and Officer Haynes would be within his authority to stop Mr. Grantz for any minor traffic violation in order to obtain his identification. During the phone call between Officer Haynes and Mr. White, Blanchard Police Chief Stacy White arrives on the scene. Within 16 seconds of his arrival, Chief White concludes that the officers have enough evidence to arrest Mr. Grantz.
Well, we don't want to identify ourselves completely. We have his name based on the tag, but we don't know that that's actually his name. That could just be the person registered to this vehicle. And he doesn't... A suspicious person... I don't know that.
If he didn't cooperate, arrest him.
Yeah, we're about to get ready to do that. Matt's trying one more thing.
You're under arrest. What are you arresting him? What are you arresting him for?
Huh?
He hasn't violated really a crime yet, so not
Are you investigating a crime or possible crime?
Possibly.
Okay,
Suspicious
he's
vehicle.
obstructing an officer from doing his duty, right?
Okay.
You said you're meeting somebody here in a few
The
minutes?
officer has a legal right to make contact with you based on a call.
And I don't
And
have
you're
to answer
obstructing that.
questions.
I'm not here to listen to you. I'm here to tell you what's going on. Okay? I don't care if you record me.
This whole interaction
We
I
are
don't really
ours
care.
are being recorded
Okay,
too.
you're obstructing an officer from doing his duty. So now you're under arrest, unless you want to cooperate.
Oklahoma's obstruction of a public officer statute is relatively vague and leaves much of its language open to interpretation. Oklahoma Statute 21-540 states that any person who willfully delays or obstructs any public officer in the discharge or attempt to discharge any duty of his or her office is guilty of a misdemeanor. Chief White is attempting to use the ambiguous language of Statute 21-540 to circumvent the state's lack of a failure to identify statute. It is highly unlikely that Mr. Grantz would be successfully prosecuted under Statute 21-540 because the officers lacked the reasonable suspicion necessary to detain him in the first place, which essentially negates any charges that would stem from that detention.
Okay? That's the way it goes. Have a nice day.
Okay. Okay, but I mean,
I'm
why
just
do I have to
saying.
answer questions?
I'm
I'm
just-
here for a legal reason.
Wait, got a call.
I'm
Can I
not.
get
I'm just
your
not
date of
answering
birth?
questions.
Can I get your date of birth?
You're failing to
I don't
identify
have
yourself.
to by law.
You
I
are
have the
failing-
Fifth Amendment right
You are failing to
not to
identify
answer
yourself.
questions.
You
What
have to
law have I
identify
broken?
yourself.
What law have I
Obstructing
broken
officer.
to identify
Is there anybody
myself?
at this house? Let's see if there's anybody at this
Put him
house.
in handcuffs.
What law have I done?
Turn around, pretend on your back for a second.
Mr. Grantz was placed into handcuffs as the officers continued their investigation. Mr. Grantz then suggested that the officers speak to the neighbor who was supposed to allow him to enter the property, who confirmed to the officers that Mr. Grantz was an insurance adjuster and was supposed to inspect the roof of the home he was parked outside of. Before leaving the scene, Chief White ordered the officers to cite Mr. Grantz for obstruction of a public official, but once the chief left, none of the officers were willing to issue the citation.
We have to cite
For what?
for obstruction. For one.
Identify.
Okay. Just relaying what two told me that one. And so, yeah.
I'm not doing it.
Eventually, the officers left the scene without further incident. Mr. Grantz filed a formal complaint against Chief White about 2 hours after the encounter began, and went on to file complaints against City Attorney David Perryman, City Manager Robert Floyd, and Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Brink for failing to file charges against the officers who detained him, and for failing to fulfill his public records requests. After Mr. Grantz posted the video of his encounter, the Blanchard Police Department deleted their Facebook page due to the messages and comments they received. Mr. Grantz went on to file a lawsuit against the officers, which resulted in a settlement for an undisclosed amount. Mr. Grantz has since filed a separate lawsuit against the city, which is still ongoing. Overall, the Blanchard Police Department officers get an F for violating Mr. Grantz's Fourth Amendment rights, displaying a fundamental misunderstanding of reasonable suspicion, and conducting themselves in a manner that was both hostile and demeaning. There were many aspects of the BPD officers' conduct that were either questionable or blatantly illegal, and it is undeniable that the department suffers from poor leadership. The fact that Chief White came to the conclusion that an arrest was warranted within seconds of arriving on the scene is a testament to his abilities as both an officer and a leader. Departmental corruption tends to trickle down from the upper echelons of the law enforcement hierarchy, and the adversity Mr. Grantz faced in an effort to seek justice indicates that the BPD's malfeasance extends beyond the department itself. It has become a common theme in many of the episodes of ATA that elected officials work in tandem to shield their departments from any form of accountability, and this pattern highlights the importance of taking part in local elections and ensuring that representatives operate in the best interest of their citizens. Mr. Grantz gets an A for maintaining a calm and collected demeanor throughout the interaction, insisting that his constitutional rights were respected, and following up this encounter with the proper legal action. Mr. Grantz did a fantastic job of invoking his rights without becoming vulgar or disrespectful, and challenging the officers despite being threatened with arrest and citation. I commend Mr. Grantz for having the legal knowledge to defend his assertions and the determination to see them through. The ensuing fallout from this interaction was particularly dense, and I was unable to cover all of the post-interaction developments in this episode. I highly recommend checking out Mr. Grantz's YouTube channel to gain a deeper understanding of his legal battle with the city of Blanchard and its police department. Let us know if there is an interaction or legal topic you would like us to discuss in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more police interaction content.